I want to ask you a question, and I don't want you to be offended by the question, but does Satan want us to go to church? And I'm going to say yes, he does, if that's all we do. And think about that while we read out of First Samuel. It's about David and Goliath, and we're familiar with the story. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle and were gathered in Succoth, which belongs to Judah, and then encamped between Succoth and Azrith and Ephes Dammim. And Saul and his men of Israel were gathered together, and they camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley in between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. I calculated that out one day. It's about 9 feet. So he would have to probably bend over coming through the swinging doors back there. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had bronze armor on his legs, and bronze javelin in between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel, and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself, and let him come down to me. And if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years, in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of the 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third was Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul, and David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Verse 16, and the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening, day after day, week after week, month after. I'd like to draw an analogy. Sometimes we can get comfortable doing the same thing, day after day, week after week, month after month. I'm guilty of that. Last Wednesday I was sitting here and I was in my comfort mode because I was at church expecting perhaps to be asked to get up and lead a prayer, which I was happy to do. I figured Randy would be here with a lesson and we would continue on as he's been doing. But when I noticed BC up here, dressed rather nice with a tie and so on, I believe, I thought, well, Randy's out of town. BC's got the lesson. Somebody else will get up and do the songs, the hymns rather, and away we go. And about that time, BC was through with getting everything ready, and he walked past me and said, "Andy, I'm going to have to volunteer you that you're going to be in charge of the song service tonight." And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I know how to get up and sing "Jesus Loves the Little Children," but in terms of doing the song service, that just said, well, as you can imagine. Some thoughts through my mind, but then I realized, you know what? You need to just trust in the Lord, look for some songs that you know by memory, because I can't read music, and get up there and do what you can, and leave the rest up to the Lord. And as I found those songs and it was time to walk up, I noticed our 2 young song leaders, Omar and Christian. Yes, guys. And I can recall on occasion when they've got songs and hymns they want to sing, and I thought, oh, gee whiz, what am I going to do if they pick a hymn I don't know how to sing? And my mind was manufacturing all of these little problems that I was going to encounter before I even got up here to lead a hymn. And so I thought, you know what? Just trust God, let Him work it out. And so I got up here, Christian got up first, and he had number 909, There's a Fountain Free. Well, gee whiz, Christian, guess what? I know that's him. That's a good one. And after him, Omar got up, and he had This World Is Not My Home. I whistled that song practically every day. And so we had those two hymns, and then lo and behold, here walks Sebastian in the back door over there, and I'm thinking, goodness gracious, and he sees me, and he just comes walking right up here, got his songbook out, gets up, he has some good hymns before BC gives us a good lesson. And so, did God already have the song service worked out? I think he did. He just needed somebody to get out of his comfort zone and be willing to get up and try to do the best he could, as we just have read a little bit about David and a little bit more, and realize that when we do things differently that maybe are different from what we're accustomed to doing, and we put our trust in God, we'll be surprised at the results that we get. Let's go to verse 16. I would like to read this again. The Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. We all, or at least I do, I can't speak for you, but we all get used to routines. It's comfortable, it's a habit, and we want to do the same thing in a manner of speaking, we're comfortable doing the same thing over and over again. And I guess I would like to present this thought this evening that I feel personally, and you can tell me if I'm wrong later, I don't mind, but I feel like in some ways Satan is happy if we go to church if that's all we do. We just come to church and worship God, which we need to do, but we don't look for other things, other ways that we can serve the Lord. And those opportunities out there, and sometimes they present themselves in ways we had never expected. And when we do, at times we can be a little maybe afraid of how it's going to work out, but we have to remember the stories in the Bible are there for a reason, and they're there to encourage us. If you look on in chapter 17, a little bit farther along at verse 28, and we know that David is he finds out about Goliath coming up and challenging Saul and his army on a daily basis, day after day, for 40 days. And we get to verse 28, and it says, Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the man, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and said, Why did you come down here, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. When we step up or step out or do something that we feel on our heart is something that we need to do based upon the talents we have to serve the Lord, you can just about expect somebody's going to try and say, that's not going to work. We tried that before when my grandpa was around. It didn't work back then. It won't work now. And there's going to be folks that are going to challenge what you're trying to do for God. And you think about Eliab, the oldest of Jesse's boys. When Samuel was going out to anoint one of the sons, and he looked at Eliab and he thought, surely this must be the one. I'm trying to recall from memory the conversation that was going on there. But God said, no, he's not the one that I'm going to choose. Men look at other men differently. I look at their heart. And later we know he chose David. You would think Eliab, David's older brother, would be supportive of his younger brother who's stepping up to do something that Eliab, the oldest brother, along with Saul and all the others, wouldn't do. Gets even more interesting. Verse 33. Saul said to David, you're not able to go up against the Philistine to fight with him, for you're a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. Again, we have the commander of the army, Saul, telling David, hey, this is not a good idea, David. You're just a kid. This guy is a warrior. He's been doing that since he was probably about your age. We're going to encounter doubt at times from other people when we try in a different way or something that hasn't been tried before to serve the Lord. And that's to be expected. Not only do we see this here in the story about David going up against Goliath, who typically doubted Christ when he was going out and healing people on the Sabbath? The leaders in the temple, the Pharisees. They would typically call him out on it and ask him, why are you healing people on the Sabbath? And he was encountering doubt many times. If it happened to him, I promise you, it's going to happen to us. Let's now go to 2 Samuel, chapter 5, and verses 1 through 5. And we know from reading our Bible, when we get into 2 Samuel, that David has already been made king. And we're going to look at some of the things now that David does. 2 Samuel chapter 5. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people, Israel, and be ruler over Israel. Therefore all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron and before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 33 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned there 40 years in Hebron. He reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel. I said this the other evening in a Bible study. I feel like it must have pleased God's heart that under David, all of the tribes came together. Because David was a man, as we know, trusted in God. No matter what the situation was that came before him, in almost all cases, there were a few, he's human just like us, where he made mistakes, but the majority of the time, he was willing to keep trying to do God's will. And the people here united behind him, and they came together, and many great things happened, giving glory to God, who was the one who was answering the prayers. And one of the interesting things about David, if you read about him, he's an individual who prayed a lot, and that's something we're going to touch on here in a few minutes. Let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. And David gathered all the children of men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring them up to the ark, to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the seraphim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. And when they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God, Ahio went before the ark. Then David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord, of all kinds of instruments, on fir wood, on harps, on string instruments, tambourines, sistrums, and on cymbals. Here we have David continuing to act and doing the things that a king does to point people towards God. Now let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 through 8. And after that it came to pass that David attacked the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Meheg-Ammah from the hand of the Philistines. Then he defeated Moab, forcing them down to the ground. He measured them off on a line. With 2 lines he measured off those who would be put to death, and with 1 full line those to be kept alive. So the Moabites became David's servants and brought tribute. David also defeated Hadarezer, the son of Rehob, the king of Zobah, who went to recover his territory at the river Euphrates. David took from him 1,000 chariots, 700 horsemen, 20,000 foot soldiers. And David hamstrung all the chariot horses, except that he spared enough of them for 100 chariots. When the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadarezer, king of Zebah, David killed 22,000 of the Syrians. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became David's servants and brought tribute. So the Lord preserved David wherever he went. And David took the shields of gold of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem, also from Betha and from Beerothiah, cities of Hadadezer. King David took a large amount of bronze. Let's now go to 1 Kings chapter 9 and read verses 1 through 9. We're familiar with Solomon, and he being David's son, he was unique in that when he became king, he was a young king, and he prayed to God, and he asked God for an understanding heart, and which God told him, I will give you. And he said, I will also give you the things that you have not asked for, wealth and wisdom. Let's continue reading along here. 1 Kings chapter 9. And I want to read about Solomon for a reason, because it's a contrast between two men, his father David and the son Solomon. It came to pass when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all Solomon's desire, which he wanted to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your supplication that you have made before me. I have consecrated this house which you have built to put my name there forever. And my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Now, if you walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and uprightness, and do according to all that I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever. As I have promised David your father, you shall not fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons at all turn from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them, and this house which I have consecrated for my name. I will cast it out of my sight. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all the peoples, and as for this house by which is exalted, everyone who passes by will be astonished and will hiss and say, why has the Lord done this to this land and to this house? And then they will answer, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, and have worshipped them and served them, and therefore the Lord has brought upon all this calamity on them. Finally, let's go to 1 Kings chapter 11. I'm reading this for a reason, and because in reading about Solomon, I want to say Solomon got comfortable. He had peace in the kingdom thanks to his father David, who fought all the different other enemy tribes, the Moabites, the Philistines, and so on. And so Solomon was living in relative peace. He was blessed tremendously by God. He had everything he could ask for, and then some. And that can be, I want to say it can be a hazard. It can work against us if we get comfortable with having everything we need and going through the same routine on a regular basis. And that's why I said, does Satan want us to go to church? And my perception or my thought is, yes, he does, if that's all we do. And it is important to go to church and worship God. But is that all we should do? Let's read about Solomon. King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughters of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of those whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, as he had taken 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines, and the wives turned away his heart. For it was so when Solomon was old, that his wife turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God. as was the heart of his father David. We begin to notice a difference here between Solomon and David. And it can happen gradually. And sometimes it happens so gradually we don't even see it happening. But we read about it in the Bible. And this is something that we need to be careful about for ourselves. That we stay loyal and we do the things that we know God needs us to do. Excuse me. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built high places in Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their God. So the Lord became angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. And he commanded him concerning his thing. And he said that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days, for the sake of your father David. I will tear it from your hand of your son. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. And we know that after Solomon passed away, his son Rehoboam remained as king, and there were two tribes that stayed with Rehoboam. And there was the other tribes of Israel that separated, and they went with Jeroboam, and there was continued strife thereafter. They had further kings, and things continued to go from bad to worse. And so you look at the effects of what one individual did with his life, and you think about our lives. Can our lives have that kind of impact on things that take place within a church that's worshiping God? Can, in other words, our lives have a good impact? And I believe that they can, because each one of us have talents. Sometimes we have talents we don't even know about, and we at times are challenged to use them. Let's go over to Ecclesiastes and read the last part of chapter 11. Solomon is saying here, fear God, keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing and every good, whether good or evil. And it's interesting that Solomon wrote this, but for some reason, it appears to me, he wasn't taking his own advice. He wasn't fearing God and keeping his commandments, because he knew that it says back in the Old Testament, which I'm assuming they have access to, that a king should not take unto himself many wives. And he did. And this became his downfall. In the book of Revelations, Jesus instructs the writer to put down in chapter 2 to write about 7 churches, beginning in chapter 2 with the loveless church at the church at Ephesus. And then we have the persecuted church, which is at Smyrna, the compromising church at Pergamos, the corrupt church at Thyatira, the dead church in Sardis, the faithful church at Philadelphia, and the lukewarm church, which is of the Laodiceans, the church of the Laodiceans. And so we might perhaps ask ourselves tonight, of all of the churches listed here, which one would we like to be listed as? And I'm going to say probably the faithful church. Because if you think of it in terms also as a marriage, a faithful, long-lasting marriage requires a lot of commitment. And sometimes it takes doing things that we didn't really think about when we were up there getting married on that particular day. But as we can see from individuals here that have had long-lasting marriages, if you were to ask them, I have a feeling they would probably say it is a lot of work, and we've had to overcome problems that we hadn't a knowledge of when we first got married, but we remain faithful to each other. And that, in a manner speaking, I think is what I'd like to think about in terms of us as a faithful church. We do the things that are normally expected of us. We come together and we worship. But each one of us, like myself last Wednesday, on occasion are going to have opportunities, sometimes we see as challenges, to do things that take us outside of our comfort zone. But when we trust God and we go ahead and do the best we can do, knowing that somehow, we don't know how, and we can't see it at the moment, in the manner that Eliab and King Saul at the moment could see no way in the world David could go up against Goliath. But David was not seeing Goliath the way that they were. David was seeing Goliath through God's eyes. And he saw Goliath the same way through God's eyes as he did the lion and the bear when they came up to take away the sheep that he was taking care of. And this Philistine, as I believe David said in the Bible, was going to be no different. And if we see the sometimes problems, also known as opportunities, when they come up in our life, whether it's getting up to lead songs that hymns that you've never led before, or whatever it is, take the opportunity. Yesterday I was taking James home. We had a Bible study. And I dropped him off at his house. And as I pulled up to his house, I happened to look across the street, and I saw the gentleman who used to be the scoutmaster in Troop 100 when my son was a Boy Scout. And we would, every month, we would go camping somewhere. And I thought, you know what? I haven't seen him in years. I need to go back and just visit with him a little bit. But that little voice in the back of your mind says, well, yeah, it's getting close to dinner time. Well, you can do that. No, the next time doesn't come. In most cases, and I think you will agree with me, that opportunity only presents itself one time. So I backed around, pulled up to his front of his house, got out and walked over there, and he looked at me for a second, and I said, hey, it's Andy. Oh, yeah, how you doing? And I said, hey, I just thought I'd come over and say, hey, thank you for being the Boy Scout leader for our kids. It helped my son a whole lot. And so we just started talking about all the things that we did back then. And then we got off to talking about, he said, are you still farming? I said, well, in a manner speaking, I'm farming about 1/20th of an acre over at the church in the garden there. And so I said, I'm growing okra and right now and a few other things. Hey, my grandma used to grow okra, and she had a little garden out there, and she would let the neighbor come over and plow that ground up, but after that, he couldn't set foot in her garden because she was going to get out there and plant the seed and cultivate it and do everything that needed to be done. And I said, do you like okra? He said, yeah, I sure do. I'll tell you what, I'll bring you some next week. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, if you'll bring me some okra, I'm going to give you Granny's secret recipe she had for making really good biscuits in a cast iron frying pan. So I'm looking forward to getting the recipe for those biscuits that his granny used to make. And I'm thinking that's probably a family heirloom that doesn't just get given out to everybody. But what else do you think we'll be talking about? And he knows to expect that from me because when we were in the Boy Scouts, he said, Andy, you're going to be the chaplain. Before we have a meal every time, you're going to be praying. So he knows what to expect from me. Do I owe at least an opportunity to hear about the good news for all that he did for my son and all the other young boys that went through that Boy Scout Troop 100, who for the most part turned out to be pretty good young men? I think he does. That opportunity, I'm going to say, was only there yesterday because I drove by that house today and he wasn't out there. He was inside. So those opportunities to get up and lead hymns that we've never led before, or talk to a neighbor and just see how God's going to work it out. They come along and we need to take them, and we'll be surprised when we do those kind of things. We'll be that faithful church that it talks about in the Bible, because we're being faithful coming here on a regular basis, worshiping the Lord, and we're being faithful when those opportunities present themselves. And you might say, well, that's kind of difficult. How do I go about that? When you get up in the morning, pray about it. And then pray that God helps you put on the armor of God, so that when you go out there, you will be able to deal with those opportunities. Not situations, but opportunities when they come up. And pray that we will remain faithful as a member, as part of the body of this church, doing the things that God wants us to do. And then we will be that church in Revelation that it talks about, the faithful church that we want to be when we go to have an opportunity to be before the Lord someday. And so in conclusion, just want to say, like the sister who came up this morning, if there's somebody here who has a need that can be taken care of through prayer, or if you have made a decision you want to become a child of God, we're going to ask you to come forward as Randy comes up and leads us in our invitation song.